Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. No matter where you're joining us from, we'll be getting started in just one moment here. In the meantime, if you would like to participate, we have 3 poll questions that we're going to ask throughout this discussion with Barry today. The first one is simply just an icebreaker. If you'd like to let us know where you're joining from today, we always like to see a little bit of globalization in these webinars. So thank you for joining, and we'll be starting momentarily. Great, I think we can go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining us today as we take a look at one of the most talked about topics to date in terms of cybersecurity, having a standards-based approach. Today we have with us Barry Turner. Barry has been with Red Lion for many years, and he is our expert when it comes to things such as industrial networking, cybersecurity, and the like. Barry is our technical business development manager. And without further ado, I'd like to allow Barry to tell us a little bit more about himself and get us kicked off with this webinar today. So Barry, go right ahead.
Well, thanks. Appreciate that, Kristen. So first, welcome to this webinar. Thanks for your attention. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that you and your industrial application is a target. You guys and your industrial application is the #1 target for ransomware and other attacks. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll also talk about how to better align your security posture within your industrial application to have a better outcome. So have a better aligned cybersecurity standard that aligns with your IT department. And to do that, you must have a collaborative approach, a collaborative conversation with the IT department. The best way to do that is to align around a cybersecurity standard like the 62443 cybersecurity standard or suite of standards, which has in it models and security principles that have been used by the IT department for many, many years and is proven to increase and elevate their security posture. And so what we're trying to talk about today is how we can learn more about that on the OT side and incorporate that into our OT applications. So cybersecurity is all about risk management. So that's at its very basic form is risk management. And so to understand where and how to become as secure as possible, you have to perform a risk assessment. And so that needs to be done first and foremost is to figure out exactly where you sit, where your assets sit, what your attack vectors look like, who might be a threat agent trying to attack your application. Again, those attack vectors, which direction, which path they might choose to come into your organization. Those are all things that we'll talk about today in this webinar. So a few key takeaways that I want you to make sure you take with you is that one, that you are being attacked or being targeted and likely attacked at some point. And that there are standards out there like the ISA IEC 62443 cybersecurity suite of standards that have principles, that have these security models that have been used by the IT department for quite some time. Leaning on these standards, implementing these security models, implementing these types of principles within your application and the design and considering them during the design of your application will help better align you with what the IT department's already been doing. And so it helps you have a collaboration instead of a IT-OT convergence. You instead have the IT-OT collaboration that's needed using these standards. And then those principles that I'm talking about, those will be defense in depth, as well as least privilege access would be another one that is called out in the standard that the IT department has been using for years, and you may actually be using them in your industrial application, but not realize it. So understanding the concepts and the principles, how they work, what's the benefits and what's the disadvantages is key to making sure you implement them appropriately within your organization. And then the last thing is implementing some of these network security models can be difficult when you're doing it. Red Lion happens to make it a little bit easier than it necessarily has to be. So with that, we'll get into a little bit about my experience. And so my experience at Red Lion, well, my experience in my career has been tied into one half in the IT side, the other half in the OT side. And so I can tell you a little bit about my experience in IT by telling you a story that I think you might enjoy about a time that I got hacked, essentially. A threat event happened on my campus that caused me to really learn a lot of things about how to increase my cybersecurity stance. And so if you go back in time, over 24 years ago, so 1999, I had gotten my first job as a network administrator of a pretty large network that had lots of servers and lots of networking components that I was responsible for taking care of. And so I need to make sure as a network administrator that I have 100% uptime and availability for the resources that are entrusted to me. So after getting this job, the first thing I do is what many of you do. You do a risk assessment to see exactly where what the landscape looks like. How much trouble am I in if things go sideways quickly? And so we do the work, we dig in and identify that I'm in pretty good shape overall on the network, except for the email server itself. So the email server itself is a very critical component to the network, but it is in bad shape. And so it is not configured properly. So it's running two mail servers or two mail stores on the same piece of hardware, which you wouldn't want to do. So we had the students' mail box or mail store and the faculty staff mail store on the same server. And then we also had the mail server was running as a domain controller, which you wouldn't want to have that normally running. The hardware itself, I said, is oversubscribed. And so we need to figure out how are we going to get past this. So we really need a new hardware. So we need a new hardware. So I do what anyone would do is you write up a report after you do your risk assessment. You send that into the administration and ask them, okay, here's a risk to the organization where we're going to experience downtime. If we don't do something quick, the server will go down, we'll lose mail services. Let's go ahead and buy a new server, move things over. And then the answer I got back is the exact answer that most of you would get in 1999, mid-budget year, which is we don't have budget for it. So let's figure out how can we put some countermeasures in place that will prop us up until the next budget cycle happens. And that's exactly what we did. And so I dug in, moved the domain controller from the server it was on over to another server, but we still had the two mail stores on the same box. And we still had hardware that was really oversubscribed for the need that was required of it. And so we're really just limping along, but we look like we might make it. And then until May of 2000. And that's when everything kind of went sideways for me. May of 2000 is when the I love you bug was released on the internet and when it made its way to my campus. And so if you're not familiar with the I love you worm or bug, what that was a worm that propagated via email. And so it landed on my campus because someone on my campus, student, faculty, staff, I'm not sure, had an address in somebody else's address book. And so when this virus propagated, if you click the link or click the script, then it sent a copy of itself to everybody in your address book. And it appeared to be from you. And so, and then the subject line was, I love you, and had an attachment that looked like a notepad attachment that said love letter. So you can imagine what people would do, getting an email from somebody that they think they know with I love you and a love letter attached. They're going to click it. And the problem is when you click it, it's not really the love letter you think it is, but instead it is a virus. And so when you click it, a little black box comes up and then it goes away. So you don't get what you expect. Guess what the faculty, staff, and students did when they clicked the email? They clicked it again, they clicked it again, they clicked it again. And every time they clicked it, the virus would execute and they would reinfect themselves, and then send the virus out to all of the other email hosts that had email addresses in their address book, which at that time was everybody. So every time they clicked that email, so any faculty, any staff clicked that link that landed in their inbox, then it sent an email to every other person that had an address in their their contacts folder. So it was everybody. And so you got thousands and thousands of email addresses or emails landing in people's mailboxes. And so what has happened is, because we didn't have layers of protection for our cybersecurity, we didn't have a way to stop what was happening, which was a denial of service attack on my mail server. And so because this was a distributed approach, there was no way for me to stop what was happening. So all these clients, every time a student or faculty staff clicked an email and opened up the attachment, then it sent thousands of emails through my server and would take it offline eventually. So I ran to the server room to try to mitigate this as quickly as possible, and ran to the terminal. The problem is the server was so oversubscribed with handling these processes that I couldn't even do anything on the back end. So I couldn't stop the service and get back and restore the mail services, because the clients themselves were reinfecting themselves and also sending mail through my server, which really took me down. So I had no choice but to unplug the server from the network and start investigating and start trying to recover. And so we experienced downtime right away. This is within a year of me being at this new organization where I had just trained and gotten cybersecurity or gotten Microsoft Certified System Engineer certified. And now I'm unplugging servers from the wall and having downtime for a very important service. So it was not my best day. And so once we bring things offline, we're able to start to recover and start pulling things back up and then moving things around to finally get the server back up and going. The long story short here, and a really important part of this, is that that even though we did not have budget for this at the beginning, after the server died and after hours and hours, and I believe it was ended up being days, that we're out of mail services, a miracle happened and we got the budget to get the new mail server that we needed. So we were able to move everything over to it, or most things over to it, and we're able to get up and running. And we had a good service that we're able, or reliable service we're able to offer the organization after that by having the right piece of hardware. Now, the moral of the story here is that if we had had multiple layers of protection, if I had had a situation where I didn't allow end users to execute malicious scripts without having elevated privileges, that wouldn't happen. If I'd had a way to separate mailboxes for the students, especially mail distribution lists for the students and the staff, that wouldn't happen. And so there's lots of different countermeasures that I could have had or put in place that would have protected my organization from what happened, but we didn't have those in place. Now, we certainly put those in place shortly afterwards, but it wasn't commonplace to have all these different layers of protection in the early 2000s, but it is today. And so that's one story that happened on the IT side when I was working as a network administrator early on. But I've also experienced customers that had trouble on the OT side, where again, if we had more layers of protection, if we had used something like a defense in depth principles, then we would actually have multiple layers to protect against any one attack vector. And so years ago, I was performing a training class on Ethernet for some controls engineers. And at the end of the class, one of the guys pulled me to the side and said that he had just recently run into a real big issue within his organization where they had a virus that really took out their production. So they experienced downtime because they let a third-party contractor come onto their site and plug directly into their network. And so they looked at the laptop, thought everything was fine, thought that they were protected, but they weren't not protected enough. And so the vendor laptop that they plugged into the network, because it was one large flat network, like many of our networks, the laptop had access and could really reach out and touch every other Windows HMI that was on the plant floor, which were all of them. And so that one laptop was able to infect every other HMI or every HMI that they had on the plant floor because it was one large network, because there was no segmentation, because there was no least access privilege implemented, because of all these different things, they were wide open and it took them down. It took them down for at least a couple of days. And so after, or we start talking about what the things that happened that led up to that, and talk about what we could have done instead of to help minimize that. And really, it's a layered approach is the best way to do that. So you really think about what are the different methods or different paths that someone might try to come in to cause harm or cause a problem with one of your industrial applications. And what does that attack vector look like? And then what kind of countermeasures should we put on top of each other so that we layer them in such a way that we're most protected? So those are two pretty good stories that I think have really helped me learn the importance of layering multiple layers or multiple counter layers of protection to increase your security posture. So next, let's take a look at what the threat landscape looks like for you guys. And I mentioned earlier that you are the target. You certainly are. And so in 2001, manufacturing went from, well, in 2020, it was number 2, and in 2021, it was number 1, the most attacked industry for ransomware. And so you guys, your industrial sector, your industrial applications are the target for many of these bad actors that are out there. And again, when I say bad actors, we're not talking about somebody sitting behind a laptop, one guy trying to get your stuff. Instead, it's an organization. It's a whole ecosystem under there that's actually trying to get access to your data and trying to really exploit you. And so if they can make your process stop, then your organization will be more likely to comply with the ransomware requirements or requests. And so those are the reasons why you are targeted more. And you can doesn't take very long to get on the internet and do a quick Google search to find out that you are indeed the number 1 target out there, and why. You can go out on a couple of different websites to look around. Like CrowdStrike is a good one. They actually have a business model where they do research and provide reports. And of course, you can sign up for a paid service and get some more information from them. But they do a good job of putting together who these threat actors are or adversaries are and who they're targeting. And so you can use the free side of their website to actually select the different industries that you're interested in, and it'll tell you how many of those adversaries are actually targeting that particular industry. So pretty handy tool. I would recommend taking a look. So next, let's talk about the standard itself. So the IEC 62443 cybersecurity standard. And so I was recently at a conference that I go to every year. It's a great conference that where I listen to many use cases for customers talking about their cybersecurity issues and success stories. And so, and in every one of those success stories, what they talked about is the people, the process, and the technology is the absolute key to implementing a cybersecurity program. And the people, being able to communicate with one another effectively and efficiently, is at the top of that. And so the people is what they said. And so when we're talking about the IT OT, again, we're not talking about convergence anymore. We're talking about collaboration. We're talking about the IT being responsible for what the IT department is responsible for, the OT department being responsible for what the OT is responsible for. Those are different environments and different responsibilities, and they should come together and have a collaboration around how best to raise the security posture to meet the needs of the organization, to make the risk tolerance of the organization, but also take into consideration the requirements of the OT network and the way the data flows, the frequency at which the data flows. All of that is different than the IT department and should be considered and should be a big part of this conversation, leaning on these cybersecurity standards like 62443 that actually has these principles, these security models that have been used by the IT department for years, that are still used today, will give you a stronger footing in this conversation. So if you learn about these security principles, you learn about these security models, you learn about the pros and cons of each. When you have this discussion, when you're having these conversations with the IT department, again, you're on a better footing than you would be otherwise. And so I encourage you to lean on them, to dig in deeper. ISA has actually the certification program. So you as a person can get certified that you know this information. It also has a certification program for the processes. So if you are a vendor like Redline that wants to make more secure products or secure products that have security more in mind, you can have your process certified, and you can also have products themselves certified so that they are secure by design and comply with the 62443 cybersecurity standard. So there's a couple different security paths, but the main takeaway that I would like to impress upon you guys is that learning from these cybersecurity standards will increase your cybersecurity posture by implementing the information that's in there. So these principles these network models, the risk assessment techniques, methodologies, all these different things you can pull out of this particular standard, drop right in place into your industrial application, and raise your security posture. So let's talk about one of the cybersecurity standards, one of the cybersecurity principles that is outlined in 62443. It's in many other standards as well, but it's something that that the IT department has been doing for years, which is just that, one fence or one gate is not high enough. We need to have multiple. And so defense in depth is just layering multiple layers of protection or multiple layers of countermeasures to give you a better posture, a better stance in your cybersecurity efforts. And so one of those at the very beginning could be patching. So do we have patching throughout our organization? How are we handling that? Do we have devices that are just sitting out there that we don't ever touch? And that's probably likely the case. And it's up to us, or up to the organization, to dig in, take a look at those devices, make sure that they're being updated in a timely manner. If they're not able to be updated, then what countermeasures are we going to put in place to make sure it's still protected? And so again, those are things that the organization comes together and figures out based on the risk assessment. And so the other thing is monitoring and detection. When something happens that is not right, somebody trying to access a port that they shouldn't be accessing on your PLC, well, do you have any monitoring and detection and alerting built into that? And so those are different layers, again, that should be added, that should help you keep an eye on the network and make sure that when nefarious things happen, that you're notified quicker rather than later. Access control is very important as well. So there's a concept called another principle called least access privilege. It just means that we only give resources the access needed to do the role required and nothing more. And so that means that this PLC that's on line 1 that has no need to talk to the PLC on line 5, they can't talk to each other. So if something gets infected or a 0-day event happens on line 1, it has no possibility of having a negative impact on the PLC at line 2 because those two can't talk anyway. And so least privilege means that you are only given that ability or given the access that's required and nothing more. And then malware prevention, super important to make sure that malware is, that you're protected against malware, that you have countermeasures that take place if you are infected, if you do get infected. The situation I talked about at the very beginning, with my IT experience, when the I Love You bug hit my campus, if we had some way to detect malware at the time, if that was a thing, then it would have been great to identify that, segment that from the rest of my network, so that I didn't take down my entire mail server, but we didn't have that. And then zoning conduits, that is that security model that we're going to continue talking about. And it's just a way to set up the architecture of your network in a boundaried way. So you're going to have multiple different zones, and you can have zones within zones, but it's giving you a way to really use segmentation to lessen the attack surface that you have on your network. And then policies and procedures, you definitely need policies and procedures for your security program. And those obviously need to be documented. They need to be in a place that everyone has access to them that has need. And then physical security is very important to security. I sometimes hear, hey, is physical security part of cybersecurity? And I believe, yes, it absolutely is. It is just another facet of your cybersecurity strategies to make sure that everything is physically secured as well. Okay, so with that, let's dig into zone and conduits a little bit more. And so before we get into that, let's talk about the Purdue model. And the reason the Purdue model is interesting in this conversation is because it just gives us a graphical representation of the way that your network is set up today. And so this is how your security model likely looks, is in that you have the control zone that we have there at the bottom. That is all of the devices within your purview. So this is your PLCs, IO, your drives. It's the things that you control all in one zone. And typically what happens is the IT department is giving you a big subnet of IP addresses and giving you this VLAN that is now yours to put as many devices as you would like. And sometimes that is a lot of devices on there. And there's very few times that there's actually segmentation. So it's just one large zone that you are in control of. Meanwhile, on the on the IT side, they usually implement security zones over there. So they usually have a zone for each department or each critical area, and then they have a new network for each one of those. And so there's there might be a new VLAN for the marketing department, and there's probably also an IP subnet that goes along with that marketing department. So each one of those devices are a different IP subnet than the IP address for another department within the IT side. But on the control side, usually everything is flat. Everything is on the same subnet. Everything can communicate with every other thing on the network. And so if we play this out to look at the Purdue model, we can see the Purdue model has everything listed in levels. Level 0, starting at where the sensors are connected. So this is our sensors actually connect to the process itself. So this is the, picking up our flow, picking up our rate. That's the process itself at level 0. And then we have level 1, 2, and 3 are all within the control zone. We have a DMZ that separates us and the enterprise zone. And you see the enterprise zone has a couple zones, 4 and 5 there, the enterprise server and network zone. But the thing that I want you to see here in its simplicity is you have zone and conduit set up today, right? You have the control zone, and then you have the enterprise zone, and then you have a DMZ in between there. And that DMZ is what that's typically used for, is that there's a firewall there. And that firewall is going to allow or disallow traffic based on the rules that the firewall administrator configured and put in there. And so traffic is monitored going through the DMZ, and it's all also restricted. And so you have zones, and you have a conduit in between those zones that monitor and allow or disallow traffic. So let's take a look at what it might look like on the plant floor. So let's take that control zone, the larger network that you likely have today with all of these different lines connected to them. They're all on one broadcast domain. So they're all in one VLAN likely. If you were to connect to line 2, you would be able to access line 1, line 3, line 4. And this is exactly what happened to this customer that I talked about earlier with that OT horror story, where he let a third-party contractor come in, plug into a grace port in the panel, and because that network port was also connected to every other device on the network or had connectivity to every other device, he was able to, that laptop ended up infecting all of his HMIs that were Windows-based. And so a better approach here is to, instead of having one open access and having access to anything on the plant floor by being able to plug anywhere on the plant floor, use these zones instead. And so you can use these zones, and it creates a layered boundary or security boundary for you to protect you. So now everything, now somebody plugs into this line 2, he's only able to get access to the devices in line 2. And so a virus wouldn't take out line 4 or line 1 necessarily, because there's no communication path there. Another thing that's important here, and we will get to the communication path, but the other thing that's important here is that these devices should all be of the same security level. And so when you do your risk assessment, you're actually going to decide what are the security level, what are the functional requirements for each one of these devices, and you're going to know which one should be in the right zone or not. This is more conceptual, so we kind of get an idea of the concept, and then in some more future webinars, we'll talk about more about risk assessment. But today, we're talking about the architecture, we're talking about security models, and we're talking about the principles that are all defined within the 62443 cybersecurity standard. So, and then we want to keep the process within the zone the same. So, if we're crossing over a boundary, if we're going over a router, if we're going across a firewall, we're going to lose time. And when we're talking about real-time communication between PLCs, many times it's milliseconds that we need instead of just a couple of seconds. And so we want to make sure that it's not going across something that's going to introduce latency in that. So for that reason, it makes sense to put the entire control within one zone if possible. And then conduits. So we talked about the constraints that the security boundaries of the zones creates, but how do we send data out of that zone into another zone? Because it's going to happen, right? We will need to send data from one zone to another zone in some situations. And so conduits is the mechanism that is used to allow traffic to go from one zone to another zone. And the beautiful thing about the conduits is that it controls that traffic and it monitors that traffic as well. So we're likely blocking everything that needs to communicate and only allowing just the conversations that are absolutely required for the application to run and nothing more. So that means that if PLC one or PLC in line one needs to communicate with the PLC in line two, it's explicitly allowed in this conduit firewall for those two to have the conversation. But the VFD, for example, has no way to communicate with the PLC because it has no need to. And so you're using the zones as boundaries to contain the traffic, and then you're using the conduit to define and allow or disallow traffic in and out of that zone. And again, it's bidirectional, so you can decide if it goes in one direction or both directions, or no communication whatsoever. So that's what those conduits allow you to do, is to allow and disallow the traffic within that particular boundary. So let's take a look at the RA10C compact industrial firewall. That is Redlion's answer to creating these boundaries within your organization without really producing a negative impact for the application. So, and let me back up one slide just to say that the reason that is to accomplish this architecture using normal technology or just anyone else's technology. You're typically going to set up a new network for each one of these lines. And so if we're setting up zone and conduits on the factory floor, but we've not set it up before, we now need to create a new network for every one of these new zones. And so if I'm creating a zone 1, a zone 2, a zone 3, a zone 4, that means a new network for zone 2 and zone 3 and zone 4 that wasn't there before. To create that new network that wasn't there before, I had to change the IP address for that new network. If I got to change the network IP address, that means a change to the IP address of every device within that zone. I've got to change the IP address. I possibly have to change the subnet mask, and I likely have to change the default gateway. So that's 3 settings that I have to change on every single IP-based device that's connected in that zone so that it's able to communicate. And so that's where things usually break down. That's where things kind of broke down with the customer that I talked about early on the OT side, and having a conversation about how can we better protect your network. It's really creating segmentation, is putting multiple layers between a would-be threat agent and the target, which is your application. How do we set that up? And so he was all about setting it up until he found out they had to make a lot of changes to the industrial application. When a controls engineer makes a lot of changes to the industrial application, really any changes in the industrial application, it does not make him real comfortable. You've got a process that's been running for quite some time. You know, we've been making widgets without fail. We've got this much uptime. If I make a change, it could negatively impact my uptime. I really don't want to do that. And so there's a lot of risk involved. You know, there's a need, there's a want to elevate the security posture by implementing zones and conduits, but there's a risk involved that makes it difficult to do so. So that's the rationale that many customers end up facing themselves or find themselves in that situation and wonder, how can we get over that? And I can tell you that the best way to get over that is to use a technology that does not require you to make a significant change to your network, but also allows you to create this network model that is defined in 62443, which is zone and conduits. And so the way you can do that is instead of a firewall, instead of setting up VLANs, instead of setting up a router, instead of setting up a routing tables in between each one of the cells, you can use Redlion's RA10C, our compact intelligent firewall, industrial firewall, in bridge mode. And if you use this device in bridge mode, there's no need for a new network on cell 1 and cell 2. You leave them the same as they are. You just plug this device in the panel. And so the cable that goes from panel 1 to panel 2, you plug it into this device here. And this device here, you use it to allow or disallow the traffic from either direction. Because it's an industrial device, plugged right into the panel, has a high level of security, so it supports RSA keys authentication. It's got multiple user levels of authentication. So when you log in, you can have people that can log into it can just only see settings, and you have users that can see it and actually make edit changes. So you can have different levels of access, allowing you to have that least access privilege principle in play, even at using the RA10C product itself. And then in terms of blocking and restricting traffic, you can decide how granular you really want to get. And so if you're just using a switch, many times you're using a whitelist, or MAC filtering to block MAC addresses from one side or the other. You can certainly do that with this firewall too. So you can block it layer 2. You can also block at TCP and UDP ports. And so you can block those traffic ports at whatever ports you're looking for, either ingress or egress. And then you can also block based on IP address as well. So source and destination IP address. And you can block ICMP if that's something you're looking to do. So you can really get granular in terms of how much you can block or lock down the traffic and which direction you want to block it. And then you can also tie some of these rules into the industrial application. So this is an industrial product. This is not an IT product that was made for the industrial application. This is an industrial appliance. And so you put this in your panel, you configure your rules, and you decide, hey, the principle of least access makes total sense to me. I do not want to allow full access to the port that I use to program the PLC over a network link open all the time. But there may be times when I need to do it. I may need to access that from my office, and I need access to that, but I don't need it always. And so you can tie, there's IO built into this device that will allow you to engage, disengage firewall rules based on the state of that IO. And so you could have a rule that says that this port is closed unless this goes high. And then you can have an operator actually press a button and allow you to get in and do the programming required. That means that that is accessible to you at the time it is needed, but then it's turned back off after. So again, making it highly secure by only giving access when it's needed and nothing more. And then the other important things is, again, it's an industrial device, 10 to 30 DC, and it goes in a panel, mounts on your DIN rail. Very small form factor. The software that you use to program this is going to be the MBNet Lite software. It's a free download off our website. There's no license to purchase to keep that running after the fact. Let's see, the other important parts here is that the software itself is very easy to use. It's got a point and click, easy to use interface. And it has a wizard that walks you through setup. And so you don't have to be a network engineer and understand everything there is to know about layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3, layer 4 to make this work for your organization. Really, all you need to know is how secure you want to be, where you want to set your zones and conduits up at, and then pull this software up, and it'll show you a graphical representation of the communication trying to happen across the router at that particular time. You can then take your mouse and you can select or deselect which ones of the devices you want to allow or disallow. So if you don't want to allow the conversation in one direction, you click the red O there that says no. If you want to allow the conversation, you click the check mark so it allows the conversation. And then if you want to block it even further, so this shows you, based on IP address and what it sees, what the intelligent router has discovered on the network already. If you want to add things beyond that, it's just a matter of opening up the firewall rules and add them in manually. And again, you can block that based on the IP address like you see here. You can also block that based on the MAC address. You can block it on the TCP or UDP port, so the services themselves, and then whatever direction you want to block it in. And you can also block ICMP traffic. So it's a very handy device that you can use. But the thing that I want to impress upon you is that you can use this device to elevate your cybersecurity stance by implementing some of these security principles that we talked about in this so far, which is the defense in depth and the least access privilege. So just before we try to wrap it up, I just want to kind of go back to the zone and conduits and the Purdue model, and again say, this is something that you guys are doing today. This is the way that your network is likely set up for the most part. I know there's some exceptions, but for the most part, this is what you have going on. You have your control zone, the IT has their zone. In the middle, there's a separated component. It's usually the DMZ. The DMZ has a firewall built into it. That firewall is allowing or disallowing traffic, but it functions in the same way that as what you're wanting to do on a plant floor by implementing these zoning conduits, is to restrict and only allow the conversations across that boundary that are required and monitoring when things happen that they shouldn't. All right, that is all we had for the presentation piece of this. Do we have any questions?
I'm taking a look here, Barry. No open questions just yet, but we do have that open poll for anyone who would like a demo of the MB Netflix user interface. We have field application engineers located throughout the United States and around the world. So we are happy to get you in touch with someone local to your location to give you a little bit more in-depth understanding and knowledge and approach with our products and our software offering. Oh, I do have a question that came in. Does this support NAT?
It does. So it does. Now, this product and the way that I'm talking about today is used in bridge mode. Bridge mode, you cannot use NAT to do that. NAT is a routing or routable function. And so, but you could use it in router mode. If you use it in router mode, then yes, there would be a different network. So let me go back to right here. So you can see on this page here, we have the RE10C, this WAN link at the top and the LAN ports on the bottom. So these are essentially like just switch ports here. And this is a routable link, and these collectively would be a routable link. And so you can use it in router mode, and you can, when you do that, you can certainly use NAT. You would just configure which side of the NAT you wanted to have your devices on.
We had another question from Malcolm. He asked, do you program, and I think you may have half answered this, Barry, but do you program through a web interface?
You do not program through a web interface. You program through this MBNet fixed software. And so you load the software up, and then you actually plug a USB cable from the laptop into the device to configure it. This is a very high secure device and has very few attack vectors, included a web server built into it. It does not have that.
Okay. As far as pricing and availability goes of some of these products and softwares, we can certainly put you in touch with someone who's more knowledgeable in that realm of things from one of our Red Lion sales reps or channel partners. So if you have information or would like more information on that, please provide your information separately. You can message me directly. We will also be following up the recording of this webinar, not only with the recording of the webinar, but then also we'll provide information if you'd like to reach out for a follow-up call with any of our salespeople. I did have someone put one more question in the general chat. Barry, can you program via CLI?
There is some CLI functionality. You're not going to get 100%. You can't do everything in the CLI that you can do in the software itself. But yes, there is a CLI that you can enable and get access to that.
Great.
And yeah, please reach out to us if you'd like to see a live demo of this. We'd love to do that. We have the FAEs have these in their possession. They have small demo labs set up where they can kind of show you a simulation of this is how we block this type of traffic, this is how we block that type of traffic. But just the general use and ease of use of this product is I think, something that really comes through in the demonstration. You see the wizard, you see how it's able to intelligently discover the traffic that it sees across the links, and then how you can really easily use a point and click to decide who should and who should not have that conversation across the boundary. Any other questions?
No more general questions. So I think with that, Barry, we can probably conclude the webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us and having your questions. Oh, we do have one more question coming. Question is fiber via SF.
SFP?
Sure. SFP, I think is what he meant to say, yes.
Yeah,
Yep,
no, these are
SFP.
all static RJ45 connections. So no SFPs form factor.
Okay.
All right, so let us know, guys. We're excited about this product. We're excited about having more conversations with you around cybersecurity and how to, like I said, elevate and increase your posture around cybersecurity. Zoning conduits is a very interesting model. I encourage you to look into that. And then least access privilege, very important. And then again, all of these things are defined in that 62443 cybersecurity standards or suite of standards. And they have a lot of tools, a lot of resources to dig in and look at there. So we encourage you to
Barry,
look
if
there.
someone has someone would like to see do we have any videos that demonstrate the RA10C online currently? Or is that something that we could set up separately and show them?
We can set up separately.
Okay, I thought so. I didn't think we had any. We are active on YouTube. We also have a podcast in which Barry talks about defense in depth. So if you haven't already, please feel free to visit our website, redlion.net. You can navigate to our resource section. We have videos, we have podcasts, as well as our literature library that spotlights a lot of these different scenarios and product offerings associated with these solutions. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. And with that, have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.